When I think about my career now, I've had a slight change in my career. I'm a clinician. I see patients, and I still love seeing patients. I've always been involved in work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've always mentored medical students, and those are things I've been passionate about. And about 2 years ago, an opportunity came at the College of Human Medicine for me to take on a role as Assistant Dean for Diversity and Cultural Initiatives. And what it did, it blends all my passions. And when we talk about intersectionality, it's a great time for me to, I can be still be a clinician. I can educate about what when you see marginalized patients, how that impacts my patient care. I feel like I can still demonstrate and show how I advocate for impacting health disparities. But more importantly, I think I can also speak to the young people, the upcoming residents, the upcoming medical students, and hopefully be an advocate for them, mentor them, and sponsor them. But also, it's a time for us to have those critical conversations. And so, I think those opportunities in my career, even this stage of my career, I'm revitalized by a lot of my passions around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm learning. I continue to learn. We should always be lifelong learners. And so these are some of the things that I think when you think about bringing all my complete self, that educator, that physician, that person of color into the space, it has given me, I guess, a new enthusiasm. And so that's, I think, one of the best things about my career now.
I was just green, green, green. Like I had no clue. It wasn't really talked about things that you may encounter or may experience or things you need to consider. I grew up with the mindset of, okay, you go to school, you get a job, you go to work every day, you do what you're supposed to, and you come on home. So with that understanding, I'm expecting it to be just as smooth and clear and easy like that. And it wasn't after a while in the workforce and realizing my experience was a lot different once I was actually in organizations. I found myself really trying to look at what organizations might have people like me. Because I will tell you, I was a little tired of always walking in a room and I'm the only one. So even though I might be the only one, maybe I can go right outside the door to the next office and there's somebody that might look like me. And just really needing to understand that I need people around me that understand my perspective as well, and not only being that one person. So that has impacted my thought process as I navigate through my career. But as I've become, I don't want to say more advanced, but as I've become more familiar and I can recognize things more quickly. I'm having more ability to be sitting at the table and being able to have more control over things, realizing how much important my impact can be, so that those individuals coming in the workforce and they see that, they might be able to help them navigate a lot better than what I had to.
I'm fortunate to be given a privilege of where my family fell in the labor market in the United States. So when you think about where people came in through America, right? African American people, for the most part, came here without any choice of their own. Hispanic American people, for the most part, came here through indentured servant programs or low-skilled labor programs, such as agriculture, farming, manufacturing, and also through economic necessity, right? Whereas most Indian Americans in the United States came here because there was a huge gap for high-skilled labor in the U.S. labor market. And that bifurcation, I think, was incredibly formative to how you see people show up in terms of their roles and occupations, and what modern American society takes for granted as of course that person's that, and of course that person is this, right? Being a Sikh American and we're having a turban and a beard as a religious minority, right? That's counterbalanced against being a South Asian male, where there's very few spaces in business law, medicine, entrepreneurship, where nowadays you can find someone that looks like me, right? Being a religious minority and intersecting with that South Asian identity, right? There still are spaces where that's not the case, but by being Indian, right, I still have that type of coverage. And there's, often when I walk into work environments, someone's worked with an Indian American person before, or a South Asian person before, particularly South Asian male. They tend to say Indian people are really hard workers or great workers, or they're incredibly smart, right? They may have never met a Sikh American before, right? And I think that's an area where I find this very interesting intersectionality, right? Where if I lean into my Indian side, as business being tribal, you get people that have more commonality, right? And so they like that more, right? And not to say I shy away or I hide my Sikh American side, you can't, but it's not something I lean into because they don't have the same commonalities to it. Whether that's like people that work with Spectrum through my business and we meet clients who work at the hospital, right? They'll be damned if they haven't met someone who's Indian American that works in the hospital, right? And I can almost immediately lean into that and I'll win business. I see that intersectionality play out as a religious minority where it plays against me, but being unfortunately branded as a model minority due to my South Asian identity, where it almost always plays in my favor, right? When I show up to a client's doorstep, they immediately assume I'm the smartest guy. Like they immediately assume that this guy, if he's here where he's at, the barriers and whatever he's passed through, the hardest working, when I like to think I am, but the reality is I'm not, right? I have lazy days like everybody else. And so to answer your question of where it plays out in intersectionality for my professional life is having a South Asian identity that is a hyper privilege in the US work environment, also being a religious minority where it plays, I wouldn't say in most places against, but in many places against, because the people just don't have a commonality of meeting a Sikh American, but they'll have a big commonality of meeting an Indian American person in their lives.
I think the patronization piece comes right off. Like we are often think less of because how refugees are perceived. Like oftentimes we are perceived as illiterate. Oftentimes we are perceived as someone who doesn't have confidence enough to speak in front of people or like presentations. And I think like it takes extra work or it takes extra time for us to prove to them like we are capable, we can do this work. So career wise, often like we are often like paid less, or when we wanna get a job, we are often asked to work in a factory than like some professional place or like some professional careers. Even now, we have refugees from Afghanistan that are resettled in West Michigan, and they are like engineers, they are doctors that they have to leave their country because of the Taliban takeover. When they are resettled here, and when we are looking jobs for them, we are approached by factories for line work, other than like engineering firms or like other professional institutions, So that is still prevalent in West Michigan. So I think like, again, in terms of openness, I think there is a lot for West Michigan to learn.
There was a time where I was a much younger professional, so when I came into Blend, for example, I was a younger professional and didn't really know kind of what I was doing professionally, but it molded me and it shaped me to be in that space. And there wasn't anybody who looked like me in that space with a family like mine and a background. So I think that those are, it's crucial. It's crucial to be able to be your authentic self and just know that if you show up and you are who you are, you will be embraced. And even if people don't understand you or can't identify with your story, you have value, and where you stand and where you walk in is valuable. And people need to see your face and need to hear your story because there's nobody like you out there.